Ever since Lucas found out that he was adopted, he was curious about his birth parents. With the help of a friend, he had been able to track down his biological mother, but his attempt to get in touch with her was not exactly successful. He felt embarrassed and decided to give up and forget about it, and he managed to do so until one day he unexpectedly ran into her on an airplane. But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Lucas could not believe his eyes when he saw her. So this can't be real, George frowned upon. Wait, what? Do you know that woman, he asked, and he raised an eyebrow in surprise when Lucas nodded and said, yes, I think so. Well, who is she? George asked, eager to know more. He had never seen Lucas so shaken up yet, so he assumed it had so be something serious, and he was right. Lucas finally sighed and said, George, I think that woman over there is my mother. George gasped and quickly glanced in her direction, wanting to get a better look at her. I don't know yet. She didn't seem happy to hear from me last time, Lucas replied. You see, he had managed to track down his biological mother some years ago already, with the help of a friend who was able to hack into the adoption agency system. He had found her name and looked her up online, and he had sent her a message asking if she wanted to meet, but she never replied. He could see that she had opened the message, and he was not worried when she did not answer it immediately. He had already thought that she might need some time to think about an answer, and he decided to wait a few days. He checked his messages every single day, but he never received any reply. After that painful disappointment, he gave up on the idea of ever meeting his biological parents and moved on with his life. His adoptive family was very loving and caring, and that was enough for him. So you can only imagine how shocked he was when he realized that his biological mother just happened to be on the same plane as him. He had only seen her face for a couple of seconds as she was putting her luggage away. He was sure of it. He clearly remembered the profile picture his mother had when he contacted her, and the woman on the plane looked exactly like her because she was her. George said. He forgot about his mother for a moment. As soon as the flight attendant announced that the passengers could take off their seatbelts, Lucas's mother got up and walked to the restroom. George quickly tapped his friend's shoulder, asking, Hey, do you see that? It's her. They both stared at her until she disappeared behind the curtain, and Lucas let out a sad sigh. He noticed something that he had not seen before. There was no doubt about it, she was pregnant. Lucas didn't know how to feel about this. He felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, frustration at the realization that his mother had given him up, but now she was having another baby. Sensing Lucas's inner conflict, George leaned closer. You can do this, Lucas. Whatever happens, I'm here for you, he said softly. Lucas quietly observed his birth mother. She sat a few rows ahead, completely unaware of his presence. He wondered if she would recognize any resemblance, if their shared genes had manifested in invisible similarities. His mother stood up, heading towards the restroom. His heart pounded as he rose from his seat. Lucas approached her cautiously. Excuse me, he said gently. She turned, her face showing no sign of recognition. Taking a deep breath, Lucas found his voice. I am your son, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Her expression shifted from confusion to shock. At first, she shook her head in denial. You must be mistaken, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But Lucas persisted, his voice firmer. Her next words were like a cold gust of wind. I can't talk about this here, she said, her voice strained. Turning to a nearby flight attendant, she asked, could you please escort this gentleman back to his seat? Lucas felt a piercing sting of rejection. As he was led away, his emotions were a tumultuous mix of heartbreak and confusion. The long-awaited encounter had ended, but it felt far from over. Lucas walked back to his seat, each step heavy with disbelief and disappointment. As the flight continued, Lucas's resolve only strengthened. He needed closure, answers to the questions that had haunted him for years. Gathering his courage, Lucas waited for a moment when the aisle was clear and approached her again. His heart pounded with a mix of hope and apprehension. Mommy began, but she cut him off with a dismissive wave of her hand, turning away to look out the window. A flight attendant, noticing the tense exchange, approached Lucas. Sir, I need to ask you to return to your seat, she said gently. Sitting down, Lucas fought back a surge of emotions. Back in his seat, Lucas gazed at the back of her seat, a mix of emotions settling into a heavy resignation. Her consistent silence was her unspoken final word. With a deep, weary sigh, Lucas began to accept the painful reality the hoped-for reconciliation was not to be. Lucas came to a somber realization. The woman seated rows ahead, his biological mother, was just that in name only. The absence of maternal love and acknowledgement in their brief interactions spoke volumes. She had given him life, but the family that had given him love, entity, and a sense of belonging was elsewhere. As the plane touched down, Lucas and George engaged in a reflective conversation. He turned to find his birth mother standing behind him, an unexpected sight that jolted him. The emotional intensity of the flight seemed to converge into this single moment. George, observing silently, gently nudged Lucas. Maybe hear her out, he suggested softly. In a secluded corner of the airport, Lucas confronted his mother. Their eyes met, revealing a whirlwind of emotions, anger, curiosity, and years of unanswered questions. Breaking the charged silence, his mother reached into her pocket with deliberate movements. She pulled out a small, seemingly insignificant object and extended it towards Lucas. In her outstretched hand was a photograph, its edges worn, colors faded by time. Lucas took it, his eyes widening in instant recognition. The image depicted a baby himself in a hospital setting. He looked from the photograph to his mother's face, a myriad of emotions crossing his expression. This simple yet profound piece of paper was a tangible connection to his past, a bridge to the woman in front of him. His mother's voice, filled with a mixture of sadness and nostalgia, began to narrate the story behind the photograph. She recounted the day of his birth, the circumstances that led to his adoption. Lucas listened. Each word she spoke peeled back layers of time, offering Lucas glimpses into a past he had never known, a story previously untold. She continued, explaining how the decision to give Lucas up for adoption was not hers alone. These external pressures, family expectations, and her precarious situation at the time had left her with no other choice. As Lucas absorbed his mother's story, his initial anger began to dissolve into empathy. He started to see the situation through her eyes, the struggles, the pain, the inevitable surrender to circumstances beyond her control. Together, they delved deeper into their shared past, revisiting the wounds left by their separation. Their conversation was a journey through a landscape of pain, loss, and longing. His mother's voice broke the silence. "I've always kept this picture with me," she confessed, her eyes never leaving the photo. "I never forgot about you, Lucas." The revelation that she had held on to this single image of him all these years added a new layer to Lucas's understanding of her. Lucas listened intently, each revelation shedding light on the complexity of her situation and the difficult choices she had been forced to make. Lucas's mother shared her deepest regret. "I never wanted to give you up," she said, her voice heavy with emotion. The sincerity in her words was palpable, resonating with Lucas. Her eyes, brimming with tears, conveyed the depth of her pain. As they conversed, a decision crystallized between them: they would become a part of each other's lives. It was a mutual commitment to explore the relationship they had been denied for so long. Lucas's mother began to unfold the history of his biological family. Each story, each name, opened a new chapter in Lucas's life. This exploration of his roots was more than just learning about his heritage. It was a journey into the heart of his identity, filling in the gaps of his self-understanding, embracing their newfound relationship. Lucas and his mother looked forward to what the future held. It was the beginning of something new, a bond forged from the past yet filled with possibilities. They parted with a sense of hope and anticipation, each aware that while the road ahead might be uncertain, it was a journey they were now willing to take together.